Are we repeating history? Part 1. So there I was, just thinking as usual. Then I started to see some patterns in the world today that paralleled history. So I just had to run a thought experiment to see what was what. The cleanest way to read 1925 to 1935 is this. In 1925, it appeared to stabilize after World War I, while in 1935, it appeared to break down. In 1925, Europe still had the spirit of Locarno. Germany was being pulled back into diplomacy, and the Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1928 reflected real hope that another great war could be avoided. By 1935, that hope had been shattered by the 1929 crash. America is almost $40 trillion in debt. The Depression, tariff retaliation, Japan is rising to meet Chinese aggression, expansion in Manchuria, Hitler's consolidation of power, the coming rise of an Antichrist in Europe maybe, and Mussolini's Putin invaded the Ukraine, invasion of Ethiopia. Worldwide, the big developments from 1925 to 1935 were financial overreach, same today, collapsing trade, same, and the failure of liberal institutions. Same thing today to contain revisionist powers. American capital had helped stabilize Germany. Remember the collapse of 2008 and the bank bailouts in the second half of the 1920s, but that stability was brittle. After the crash, banking panics and collapsing demand spread across borders, while protectionism, same, deepened the fall. Now let us take note that U.S.-Europe trade fell by about 2/3 between 1929 and 1932 under the Smoot-Hawley's era, and the League's own plans were swept aside as countries turned inward behind tariffs and quotas. Who was rising during this time? Nazi Germany, Stalin's Soviet Union, Imperial Japan, and Fascist Italy. Hitler became chancellor in 1933, made the Nazi Party the only legal party that year. Now we have the Democrats shooting at Trump, and they want to pack the Supreme Court, and, after Hindenburg died in 1934, fused party and state power around himself. Stalin completed his grip on the Soviet system by 1930 as rivals were expelled and state-directed, Zoran-Mamdani effect. Industrialization accelerated. Japan seized Manchuria in 1931, Russia and Ukraine. Mussolini invaded Ethiopia in 1935, China and Taiwan. Who was going out of power or dissolving? In the United States, the laissez-faire confidence of the 1920s gave way to Hoover's failed crisis management and then Roosevelt's activist, meaning socialist, state. In Germany, the Weimar coalition's politics cracked under the pressure of the Depression. In Spain, Primo de Rivera's rule collapsed, and the Second Republic emerged in 1931. The League of Nations did not formally dissolve in 1935, but its authority was visibly failing. It seems true for the UN now. Now, let's take a trip back in time to the old United States of America, from 1925 to 1935, which meant Coolidge's confidence, Hoover's crisis, and Roosevelt's intervention. The stock market crash shattered confidence. Banking panics shrank credit. Hoover's efforts failed to stop the spiral. Roosevelt's first New Deal, Zoran-Mamdani effect, then moved quickly to stabilize banks and rebuild state capacity. The FDIC was created in 1933, and national deposit insurance began in 1934. That is one major reason 2025 to 2035 is not a straight replay of the early 1930s. Now jump to 2025 to 2035. The parallels are real, but they are not exact. The strongest parallels are elevated debt, tariff politics, asset price vulnerability, geopolitical fragmentation, and public anger at elites and institutions. CBO projects federal debt held by the public rising from 101% of GDP in 2026 to 120%. What? The bankers own us at this point in 2036. The Fed, for some reason I don't trust them LOL, warned in late 2025 that higher risk asset prices remained elevated relative to historical relationships with cash flows. The OECD and World Bank both warned that trade fragmentation and policy uncertainty are now core risks to growth. Now we are getting somewhere, for here is where. The 1930s echo is the strongest. Now don't get me wrong, I am not saying that we are looking at the same event with the same outcomes, but the same dangerous pattern of economic stress feeding political hardening. In 1930, the United States turned to the Smoot-Hawley tariff. However, we see that in the 2025 and 2026 era, the White House again made tariffs a central tool. Don't get me wrong, globalism was bringing slavery and serfdom to our doors. While the OECD reported that U.S. tariff rates had risen sharply and remained a major uncertainty for trade. UNCTAD warned in 2025 about economic fragmentation and geo-economic confrontation. The military picture also looks more like a hardening interwar world than the relatively soft globalization story many people told in the 1990s and 2000s. SIPRI reported that global military spending hit $2,718 trillion in 2024, the 10th straight annual increase, with Europe, the Middle East, and Asia all arming more heavily. The Russian threat drove Europe's rise. China kept expanding its military spending. Japan posted its biggest jump since 1952. That is not 1935, but it is a world moving away from cheap peace assumptions. There is also a mass politics parallel. Again, let me be clear. There is no exact 1930s figure that maps neatly onto those in power in the past. Donald Trump, God bless him, is very unique. The closest American parallels are a blend, not a single man. Hoover on tariffs and economic nationalism, Huey Long on anti-elite populist energy, the Democrats and how they hate first millionaires and now billionaires because they have so many millionaires, LOL. And Father Coughlin on direct media, social media today, loyalty and bypassing gatekeepers. But the mismatch matters more than the similarity. Trump returned to the White House in 2025 inside a still-functioning constitutional system, not amid a Weimar-style collapse of parliamentary order. The United States still has deposit insurance, a reserve currency, automatic stabilizers, and a much stronger administrative state, or deep state, depending on how you look at it, LOL, than existed in 1930.